Okay, wonderful. Tonight we're going to look at something a little briefly. We're going to look at the second part of it next week, so they'll both be briefer than one massive thing, which is always better. And we're kind of looking at the question, what stops us from serving God? But also the question of what stops us living life full throttle for Jesus, and what actually, I would also argue from this, is how to live life well. Because actually I think all of us would like to live life pretty well. We get one chance at it, so we think, I might as well do it all right. So I think the things we're going to talk about, and whether that's overcoming something or something within our character, I actually see that whether it's something that stops us from serving God or stops us from living life properly or stops us from living to Jesus, it kind of all much for muchness for us. But we've had The Impossible is Nothing kind of knocking around since September now. And just to remind us, and I'm sure you know this, but it's more than just a random sticker competition, and more than just a saying and a theme that we might have, that actually our aim and our need, I would also argue, is that we should live like this, the impossible is nothing. And that includes kind of something that would be, sharing our faith with others, which sometimes is pretty hard. Why do we share our faith with people? Well, actually, because we believe that living life with Jesus is the best possible way to live. Serving others, maybe serving others or serving Jesus is a part of our faith. Living a life of service, of mission, of evangelism, we talked about a few weeks back, then that's kind of what our lives are about as Christians. They're about loving him, but also loving those people in the world who don't know him as well. And I was reading through some of the Old Testament in the last couple of weeks, and when I say reading through something, I was meaning like one book. But no, reading through a few of Paul's letters, he talks a lot about putting off or taking off our old self and our old way of life and our old way of thinking and embracing or putting on a new self. Because Paul says that you are now no longer, once you become a Christian, you are no longer called a sinner, but actually God calls you a saint, a holy one, chosen. He says that you are more than a conqueror. And he uses some amazing words to describe us. And there's something within that there's a change that happens within us. But still sometimes when that change happens, there's things within us knocking around, this old self, this old way of thinking that affects our walk with God. I want you just to have a turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Some really famous verses, Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 3. And I'll just read them to you. I think your translation is basically the same as mine. To be fair, I probably should have used one of those, but I can't change it now. It says this, Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, that's Jesus, who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I love these verses. It's a version I was reading this week. I thought the Bible was getting a bit raunchy because it said to strip off everything that hinders. And I was like, whoa, calm down. But actually it means throw off everything that hinders. And that means every weight, every burden. When you look at the original translation, what the Greek really means, it means something that impedes you. Anything that gets in the way. So it says, throw off this stuff in your walk with God, in this race that has been marked out for us by God. Like, get rid of that stuff. And then it says, and the sin that so easily entangles us. So there's two different things. There's these weights, these burdens that we carry, and then there's sin. And they both get in the way of living life for Jesus and serving Jesus. And sin is one huge thing that stops us from serving God. But let me say something right now Sin prevents us from serving God when we allow sin to prevent us from serving God. Sin does not prevent God from using you. Otherwise, I would never be stood here because I'm sinful a lot of the time. God can still use you even if you mess up. That is not an excuse to mess up. And if you have a mindset of, well, therefore I can go and do what I want, you don't really know God and his grace that well, or his love. But actually, sin itself doesn't prevent God from using us, but sin does hinder us and gets in the way when we allow it. Let me tell you a story. So some of you may have heard this story many years ago. But when I lived at my old house with my parents, we lived in the middle of the countryside. And there was a massive window in the kitchen that kind of looked out onto like a driveway and like a big garden at the front. And one day I was there staring out the window, as you know, life in the country isn't great. So I was just staring out the window, and on the driveway was a pigeon, and not any sort of pigeon, by the way. This was, like, sometimes you see them. I want to call them obese pigeons, but I don't know if that's a correct phrase. But he was massive. Like, I was like a double take towards the pigeon because I thought it was two, and my eyes had gone weird. But it was one massive, fat pigeon. He wasn't taller than a normal pigeon, but he was at least twice as wide. And he sort of waddled around the driveway. And anything that he could find, he was pecking at and eating. I believe he was also trying to eat the gravel, as was the fatness of the pigeon. So he was just wandering around on the driveway, and I was just looking at it, astonished by the fatness of the pigeon. Something changed and caught my gaze at that moment. My parents had a cat called Honey, and despite the name Honey, Honey was a vicious killer. Would kill anything from baby rabbits to squirrels to eagles. Like he would just bring stuff in through the cat flap. Brought in, I think one of our neighbors once. No, he wasn't that bad. But like he was a killer. And he was just like walking across the driveway towards the fat pigeon. The fat pigeon was so consumed with eating gravel or whatever else they was trying to eat, didn't notice for ages the cat creeping up. I thought, I'm going to watch how this plays out. So I was just being the kind of cool man I am. I thought, I'm going to watch this. So I got the camcorder. No, I didn't, because I thought, you've been framed. No, and I just saw Honey approaching. All of a sudden, the pigeon turns and the pigeon sees the cat. At this moment, my fat pigeon friend decides I need to take off because flying is what I do as a pigeon. This is how fat the pigeon was. He couldn't get off the ground. He like kind of just flew like a tiny bit, literally into a hedge, and then just kind of sat there and stood there and then kind of flapped his wings, but just didn't go anywhere. By the way, pigeon was not injured. Pigeon was just overweight. And the cat continued to come closer. You could see the pigeon's expression change. If you can imagine this, there was fear in the pigeon's eyes all of a sudden. I was looking out the window like, this is brilliant. I was young. And all of a sudden, like beads of sweat were forming on the pigeon's brow, and it was just dripping down. He was like, I don't know how I can get out of this. The cat continually getting closer. Remember the cat that kills? And I want to be able to tell you how this story pans out, but I don't know if I should, because it's not as good as I hoped it would be. What would be a good ending to the story would be, and the cat ate it. But that's not the end of the story, unfortunately. I think a car, like I think either my brother or my dad drove into the driveway at the moment to say, like the cavalry, like saving people from, like in a western maybe years ago, and like just came in, and the cat kind of ran away, and the pigeon sort of just waddled off. I never saw the pigeon again, so I assume it got eaten later. But it was just a bizarre scenario, because the pigeon, in my mind, pigeons have one function. Fly around. That's all you do. You don't do anything else. You just fly. And he was so weighed down with the amount of gravel or whatever else he was deciding to eat, he couldn't even do the thing he was made for. You see, one of the huge problems with sin, or selfishness, that I call it, selfishness towards God and others, is that sin weighs us down. And sin brings guilt. And if I'm honest, that guilt that comes out and that shame that comes out from sin seems to show up more in my life. Don't know if it's just me, but it maybe shows up more in my life when I turn up to church. And all of a sudden, I'm like, can I sing this song? Can I pray this prayer? Can I read my Bible today? Because what did I do this week, last night? What did I think this morning? But I want to encourage you. I believe sin stops us from serving God when we let it. Because you are redeemed and forgiven by Jesus. That his blood shed on a cross has washed away your sin. And now Jesus doesn't see you as a sinner anymore. He sees you as a saint, a holy one, chosen, his child. The problem is when we let sin and we let the enemy rule in our hearts in such a way where sin and what we have done in the past prevents us from stepping out for God and serving him. God never keeps us at arm's length. He doesn't have to. Because of Jesus' blood, he always draws us close and wants us close. Apart from sin, there's many specific sins that we could pick up on tonight. I'm just going to mention one, and then one other area that I think maybe they're just for me. Maybe they're just things that I in the past have struggled with. But I think maybe they're stuff that hopefully you'll connect with as well. And the sin I want to mention tonight, something that I think hinders us from serving God, is pride. And pride, when you look at it biblically, it means an arrogance. And it means an insensitivity to the needs of others. It's when you look at and you translate the words that they use for pride, it hints that it's an attitude and a behavior and an action. But God's pretty clear about pride. Proverbs 16 verse 5 says this: the Lord detests all the proud at heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. Proverbs 16:18, just later on in the same proverb, says this: pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. And this attitude of pride, you see it within the Bible, and so often within the Bible, pride brings destruction. Great example of it. We haven't got time to go into it tonight, but read in 2 Chronicles 26, King Uzziah, a king who basically pride leads to his downfall. And God hates sin. He hates it. He doesn't hate the sinner, but he hates the sin. And he hates pride. And one question I was thinking about as I was looking at this is, how do I know that if I'm proud? How do I know if there's any area in my life that I'm proud? I looked at a few verses. Psalm 10 verse 4 says, in his pride the wicked man does not seek him, does not seek God. In all his thoughts there is no room for God. And you see, what this psalmist is getting at is that when we are full of pride, we don't seek God because our attitude is, I can handle it. I can deal with this. And it means, I would say, that God can't use us the way that he wants us to, wants himself to. He can't use us in such a way that actually he would desire to, because of the pride within our hearts, because we don't even seek God in the first place. The sort of statements that may come out of someone that's sort of pride is, I don't need anyone else. I don't need to practice. I can get by just on my gift. I'm better than you. Let me be honest, I don't hear many people say those words. But saying it and thinking it is a completely different thing. That I'm better than you. I mean, as Christians, I think we do it a lot. Even in a spiritual sense. We have this kind of thing within us that sometimes where it's like, I attend church in A2J more than you. I think I probably read my Bible more than you. I'm pretty sure I pray more than you. And we have this within our hearts when we judge people in some way that isn't right in the slightest, but we look at people in such a way where sometimes within our minds and within our hearts, we're almost saying, I'm a little bit better than you are. My life with God is better than your life with God. And like sometimes that sort of statement just comes from pride. Romans 12, verse 16, part of that verse is, do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of a low position. Associating with people of a low position is basically being humble. You know, and as I always say, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. And I doubt many of us will even say these things out loud, or even maybe think these things consciously, but are they in our hearts? Proverbs 11:2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. And James chapter 4, and it's also in 1 Peter, which shows, I think, this statement is pretty special and close to God's heart, where he says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Pride is a big issue, and pride is something that we need to be aware of, that it never creeps in. I always enjoy the story many years ago that Mike Pirovacci told just to some leaders at a Soul Survivor years ago, when Andy Croft was his intern, and he said that he spent the year with him, and then he said, you know what, Andy, after you finish university, I want you to come and work with me, but every summer I want you to co-lead the festivals with me, and I want you to speak. I think you've got what it takes. I think you've got a gift. And he said, like Mike Pirovacci was very honest and was like, I love what Andy Croft's statement was, he said, because he said, Mike, like, I'd love to do it, but what if I become proud? What if I think I'm all that because I'm stood on a stage in front of 10,000 people for 3 weeks in the summer? And you know, that's the kind of heart that we need. What if I become proud? I don't want to become proud. Pride is a huge thing that God hates. It's a sin. But there are also some things, and it says here, doesn't it? Weights, burdens that we carry that can get in our way of serving God. The one, when I was praying this week, that came to my heart was fear. And you know, we have fear of the unknown. Fear of doing something because we have no experience in it. A fear of people, not because you think they're going to do something nasty to you necessarily, because of what they think of you. We live in a culture of fear, it says quite a lot on the news now, doesn't it? Because of terrorism. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 is an amazing verse, where it says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. See, fear is not given to us by God. It comes from ourselves, and it comes from the devil himself and the world to us. I love the story of creation. Like, I love reading it. It kind of tickles me, different parts in it, that God was kind of like the first fashion designer, and just little parts like that I just pick up. But you can read that later. But I just love the story, because God creates this perfect world, perfect human beings, crazily attractive, I assume, crazily intelligent. They're perfect in every way, but they have free will. And they choose to disobey God. They choose to find out themselves what they think right and wrong is, rather than trusting what God says right and wrong is. And they mess up. What's the first thing that Adam and Eve do when they mess up? God is walking in the garden and says, where are you? What have Adam and Eve decided to do? They've gone and hid. Which is strange, because they couldn't hide from God, and God knew exactly where they were anyway. You see, fear makes us hide. It makes us hide ourselves. And it definitely doesn't help us serve Jesus. Fear also makes us forget our identity. You read through the Old Testament and you look at the nation of Israel, and God time and time again delivers them and helps them and saves them. Time and time again, Israel are like, yep, you're our God, we're going to follow you, we'll go for it now. And much like us in our lives, Israel seems to be a bit of a parallel to us as humans quite often, is that actually after a while, they start to doubt God, or they get distracted, or they start worshipping something else in their lives. They put something else first in their life. And it gets to a point where actually they forget about God. And when they forget about God, they forget their identity. And they get to a point in their story where time and time again, they become so fearful of other nations, of problems, of issues. And they forget the promises that God has said, I'm not going to leave you. You're my people. I'm your God. I will help you. I will take you here. I will do this. Again and again, God is making a covenant. He's got a covenant with them, but he's making promises again and again to these people. But they forget who God is, and then they lose their identity, and they start to fear, and they fear the people, the problems, the situations they're in. They lose their identity, and it's a huge problem, because fear doesn't just make us hide, it makes us forget our identity in Christ. Because we suddenly start looking at the problems in our lives, the issues that we face, the exams or the stresses of life or the problems that we face. And all of a sudden it's like, I can't cope with this. And we forget that God says, you're my child. I'm not going to leave you. I love you. I have planned for you a future with hope in it. I have created good works for you to do in the future. I'm with you. And you know, fear makes us hide. Fear makes us forget our identity. But the amazing thing is that we can be fearless in Christ. And I'm not saying that you will never feel fear again. No, because that's not realistic. And that's not what I believe God is about. That we feel fear, but we go for it anyway. And courage isn't the absence of fear, it's carrying on anyway. It's doing it anyway. And you see that none more so in the New Testament with the disciples. You know, for the disciples, once they have planted their churches and they're starting to, you know, Jesus ascended back up to heaven, they've seen the risen Jesus, and they start preaching and they form churches. For anyone at this time, pretty much across the whole area, if you stand up and you say, Jesus is my Lord, it's pretty much a death sentence. But people did it by the thousand. Those people had some fear. I guarantee it. They were humans. But at the same time, they were like, I'm going to do it anyway because Jesus is worth it. And you know, the change for the disciples and the change for the church was after they were filled with the Holy Spirit. It's almost like the Holy Spirit released power into their hearts, into their lives, and they suddenly realized that the power that was within them was so much greater than the fears that were in front of them. So they didn't care what was in front of them anymore. They were just like, well, I've got God living in me. Isaiah 41 verse 10 says this, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. If we truly grasp that, I think our lives would change. Grasp the fact that God says, I am with you. I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will hold you up. God tells us again and again through the Bible in many different ways to be bold, strong, and courageous. He's given us a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. And I also believe that as church family and as a family within A2J, we help one another in this. Proverbs 12, verse 25 says this: anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. How often has a kind word helped you in your day? A text, someone saying something to you that just encourages you. Even someone saying to you at some point in life, like, if you ever need to talk or you ever need a prayer request, message me. Like, we need to be there with kind words for one another because we are family. Encourage one another. Spur one another on to run the race that God has set before us. And I think both of these are issues, pride and fear, that all of us at some points in our lives can relate to. Next week, we'll talk about some other stuff, maybe some random stuff a little bit. You might think, oh, how does that work? Things like schedule and maybe loving the wrong thing. But how do we overcome these? Like, really briefly. It's great because the verses that we read in Hebrews 12 tell us. The Bible's great like that. I mean, it seems to pose a question, and then you read it and you're like, oh, you kind of answer it. That's wonderful. If you still got the Bible, maybe turn back to it again. Hebrews 12. Just so you can make sure that I'm not making it up. How do we overcome these things? Because it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, that's referring to the previous chapter, people who are examples of great faith. Let us throw off everything that hinders, things like fear, but we'll have more next week, and the sin, things like pride, that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out. See, God has marked out a race for us, a life path for us. And then verse 2, how do we do that? It could have I just inserted those words, but it could just easily be there if God wanted to put them in. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Fix your eyes on Jesus. That means look to him in everything. Acknowledge him in every way. Keep him at the center of all you do. Fix your eyes on Jesus and what he has done and who he is. That's what that verse really tells us to do. And then verse 3 says, consider him, that's Jesus, who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. You know, if I go for a run, I'm one of those people, as I often would have told you, that when I'm running, I feel like death half the time. But then if a car goes past or someone's walking the other way, I look amazing. Like, I just like, I don't want you to see me struggling, so I'm going to spring along just like, oh, I'm barely breathing. I don't need to breathe. And that's the way I kind of do it. It's a pride thing. We'll pray about that in a minute. But like for many of us, that's probably how we would do something like, because we don't want to see people to see that we're struggling. But the main thing is when you go for a run, is that you get to a point, or you do any exercise in some way, you get to a point where you feel knackered. But you think, I should do a little bit more. I should keep going. And that's the point where it's easy just to give up. But actually, that's the point, if you want to improve fitness, just a bit of sports science degree coming out here for you. It's not deep. But that's the point that we need to press through. That's the point where you have to do that little bit extra. Because actually that's when it makes more of a difference for us. Keep going is what that verse says. Keep going. Keep pressing forward. And I believe what keep going and pressing forward means for us practically is that we need to take action. Sometimes we talk about stuff and we leave and we're like, oh yeah, I need to deal with pride. And we go away on the Sunday saying, I need to deal with pride. We don't do anything. It's like, yeah, I really struggle with fear. And you go away being like, I do struggle with fear. And I got prayed for, but I still struggle with fear. And we don't do anything. And you might be like, oh, I don't know what to do. Well, my first point of call would be, yes, get prayer. But secondly, talk to someone. It's important. 1 Corinthians 9:24 says this, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Paul says, run the race, your life, serving Jesus. Do life this way. Go for it with Jesus. Fix your eyes on him. And if you do that, you will get the prize. You might be like, what's the prize? The prize is Jesus himself. The prize is intimacy with him. The prize is eternity with him. But it's just knowing him whilst we're here on earth.